tell my wife, she's, thinks I'm a big deal.
Yeah, tell your wife to watch the show. Where's that
She,
video?
she
How come it's not showing up here? Should
Yeah, it takes a second.
should I refresh?
Yeah, give it a refresh. It should pop
A
up.
little refresh button.
The assets.
Yep.
There it is.
I think we should start the pre-show with Coach Wellner's question.
Oh yeah.
oh,
a great idea.
that's what, like how nice I was to get in that job.
Where they play.
I thought that's what he was
Yeah,
gonna
cool.
bring up, but he didn't.
You sent me all kinds of graphics and assets that have to go on the show.
I sent it.
I got some kind of email from you.
I just sent it so you had the information so you could do his name and spelling. And
No,
all.
he's good to go.
You sent me
He's
stuff
up there.
for, advertiser stuff.
He might have.
Was that you?
Did you get Spit and Uncle Sam's to sponsor my appearance tonight, Mike?
Oh boy, I was going to get the deli, the Levittown. What's the name of the deli?
Division Deli. So it closed, man.
I know there was an article
guy's
in
just-
Inside Lacrosse about it.
He's just doing catering now.
Yeah, I heard your mourning when it happened.
Yeah, I'm still wearing a black chicken cutlet strapped to my arm right now. It's just
Okay, we're on the pre-show with Coach Burns.
Frank, can you pull in that video from when we interviewed Coach Wellner 2 weeks ago?
Oh yeah,
are we live right now?
yeah.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay. Is there a 14-second delay for me?
So we're pulling in a video recording of Coach Wellner asking you a question.
Asking me a question?
Yeah.
Question you want to ask a future guest. So since we got Coach Byrne on in a couple weeks, what do you want us to ask Gerry once he comes on the show?
You know what I would really like to know? I would really like to know how he got his flow. So when you guys hang up and as you're preparing for the next show, take some time to Google Gerry Byrne's flow. And I'd like to know, what he was thinking at the time. And I'm definitely gonna tune in to hear it because it's definitely gonna be a good story.
Yeah, I feel like there's a good picture out there that we're gonna have to grab and get that up on social media pre-show.
I mean, I'm personally
that's a
excited
great
to hear about Coach
question.
Byrne. I really, this is a coach I've looked up to.
So we actually couldn't find any pictures on Google, so I guess we got to just hear the story, and hopefully you do a good job telling us.
I think probably my best hair story has to be senior year in high school, senior year at Chaminade, and senior portraits. Because if you've ever been in Chaminade, every graduating class from the founding of the school 100 years ago is up on the wall, and perfect photos, perfectly gridded up and down. A lot of bad blazers and bad ties and changing hairstyles over the years from the early 20th century. So my big moment comes, and my mom, God rest her soul, she's panicked, and the barber we usually went to in Levittown on Newbridge Road, Nunzi, this Italian immigrant, was on vacation. So she's rattled, and we go to this place called TSS, Times Square Stores. It was right on the corner of Hempstead Turnpike and Jerusalem Avenue in Levittown. And if you're from that area, it was right across the street from the Lemon Tree, which was the first haircutting chain salon. But so instead of going to the Lemon Tree, which was the safe play, she took me to TSS. Now, TSS was the equivalent. This is 1982. So, spring of 1982. TSS was the equivalent of like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or one of the big box stores. So we roll into TSS. TSS is where you went to get your school supplies, and it was not where you got your haircut. And so we roll in there, and the guy's got a total shaky hand. He's like this. And that's his cutting hand. I'm like, horrified. So I'm in there. It's like $5 a haircut, maybe $5 with the tip. So I get a haircut. I look like teenage George Washington. I got like a middle part, a forced middle part, and it's terrible looking. But it's not like it's bad, but it's like, well, maybe, So my mom, my pictures the next day. So my mom, I go to bed, she's like, "Oh, it looks great," and I'm like, "All right, I guess it looks great." She gives me a hairnet, so I sleep with a hairnet to make my hair look as good as it looks right now. So I sleep with a hairnet on, and I get up the next morning and I look like I have a total wig on. And I go and get my picture. So to this day, I tell every kid from Chaminade that that I recruit that after our first phone call, he needs to go find my graduation picture and have a good laugh. 'Cause I got a corduroy blue blazer on, a sock tie, and teenage George Washington hairdo. True story. So as far as like college flow, when I was named the head coach at Harvard, one of the first people to comment was my alma mater, UMass, because we play them, and they post like my freshman picture and say, "Hey, we're looking forward to this game." I'm like, I won't tell you what I said because you can't say it on live internet. But I was like, because I look like Peter Frampton in this picture. I have an afro or wafro about like this big. It was 1980. I went from the George Washington to the full like spray activator curl, and but that's how they started our relationship. They posted a picture, a really terrible curly. I look like the greatest American hero. I know I'm dating myself, but it was not a good look.
And that was a great show, by the way.
Exactly. A lot of 80s references there. Hopefully you have some older listeners.
Do you have to wear a batter's helmet to class to keep the thing down?
Oh man, back those helmets, the Bacharach helmets back then, you'd have hair coming out all sorts of places.
Every crevice.
I look like the Predator.
All right. Well, great question. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
stories.
Coach Wellner.
Thank you, Coach Byrne, for entertaining us as always. I think we let's roll the intro. We'll get right
I'm
into
going
it.
to run the intro and start it up.
All right, welcome everyone tonight to our next episode of Beyond the Game with Coach Gerry Byrne. He's the newly appointed or fairly newly appointed head coach over at Harvard for the men's lacrosse team. Before we get into Coach Byrne's story and talk a little bit about his experience and his coaching journey that has led him to Harvard, just want to give a quick shout out to some supporters of our show. Epic Lacrosse is a huge promoter of what we do, and we're spreading their brand and everything that they're about. They do an amazing job, have the most elite and innovative technologies in and around the sport. Also, shout out to Crease Beast Goalie Training, ran by Chris Gill, who's an Albany alum. He is one of the best goalie trainers on the island. He trains some of the best, both boys and girls, all ages, and does an amazing job. So shout out to both of them for supporting BYG, and it's a pleasure having Coach Byrne on the show tonight. Gerry, how we doing?
Great, Corey. Great to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, I think the best place to start is, for the people that don't know your background, just growing up, when did you kind of get into lacrosse? Talk a little about, where you were born and raised and how that kind of shaped your experiences kind of getting into the sport. And then I would love to hear kind of when you decided and at what point in your life were you like, hey, I want to be a college lacrosse coach.
I didn't, being from Levittown, where I'm from, historically, one of the foundational programs on Long Island. I think at one point when my older brother Steve was inducted into the Long Island Hall of Fame, Levittown had the most inductees. So even though, the sport was pretty prevalent in our town, we never played. My brother, my oldest brother didn't play. He went to Holy Trinity. My middle brother, Steve, who became a great player at Virginia, he started playing when he was a sophomore. And I didn't start playing until I was a junior at Chaminade. And, not to be a cliche, but I legitimately got cut from every team at Chaminade. And I went through an awkward phase, and some people would say I'm still in it, but I grew 6 inches in 1 year, and it really affected my hoop game and really affected my coordination. And but I've told the story a few times. My mom basically called me out sitting on the couch one summer. I could see the moment. I was the 4:30 movie was on, which is, if you're of a certain age from New York, that was on ABC Channel 7, and it might have been John Wayne week. And I was watching, the Sands of Iwo Jima, and my mom basically called me out and said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm watching, the 4:30 movie. It's John Wayne week." And she's like, "You need to get off the couch." And I'm like, "Mom, I got cut from all these sports," and said, "Your brother has become a great player, and you should try it." And without her prodding, I probably would have never done it. And I'm glad she did, and it's made all the difference. And as far as kind of getting into coaching, I don't think I ever foresaw it. How I got into coaching is like, I think for most people, it's fortunate, good luck, maybe some struggle and challenges. But I got into it because I was working for a company outside Boston, and a public company, and I got let go. I got fired, and but it was a really good executive position, and I got a severance package to not work. And during that time, my wife and I, Tracy, had adopted 2 boys who were older, and because I didn't have to work for a time period, and we had adopted the kids, I decided the town we were living in southern New Hampshire had fired their high school coach, and I wanted to be a good citizen of the community, so I volunteered to coach, and some would say I never worked another day of my life.
I'm kind of curious. I find your story really interesting as you go back to when you're sitting on the couch and your mom's like, "Hey, you gotta do something here. Like you gotta get active. Like you gotta join a team or something, or a club." Your story, from what I remember, you kind of built a relationship with some of the coaches, right, at Chaminade, and then they kind of took you under your wing a little bit and said, like, "Hey, like you can be pretty good at this thing." Do you mind just sharing that story with everyone else, like the process of like going from sitting on your couch to eventually making the lacrosse team and playing at Chaminade?
Well, I had a bunch of great friends who went to the public school in town, at the Levittown Division, and I ended up going my rising junior summer going to Jim Adams' lacrosse camp at Blair Academy in New Jersey, and my brother was working the camp, and I ended up meeting a bunch of guys from Levittown, who became great players. Eddie Cook, who was an Ivy League Player of the Year at Cornell, and Todd Esposito, who became a great player at Virginia, and Joe Weingart, who was the first All-American ever at St. John's, and just a tremendous group of athletes. And so because I went to a different high school, I didn't necessarily hang out with them socially. So that was kind of my first. And again, my brother was a tremendous inspiration to me because he had an athletic foundation and a competitive ferocity, and so watching him do it combined with my mom's prodding. But I didn't. The tryouts at Chaminade were in February, and this is actually a funny story. So Jack Moran was the head coach and still is the head coach at Chaminade, who happens to be from Levittown, and he loves telling the story that I showed up to the first, the mile run test in February. And as a side story, my parents had just gone to Ireland to visit, and they brought me back one of those Irish cable knit sweaters that, those sweaters, they could take like a knife attack. But then, the reason the fishermen wear them on the west coast of Ireland is because it survives any weather. But they're hot as bejesus and kind of itchy. Jack Moran to this day will tell the story that I showed up, and it's a true story, that I showed up to the mile run wearing that sweater, and that he tells the story that he almost cut me on sight. That who shows up to a mile run wearing an Irish cable knit sweater? And and the only reason he kept me was because he had coached my older brother Steve at Levittown Division like 4 years earlier. And he said, well, I know that guy's not adopted because they look very similar. So he's got to have some genetic connection to him. And that guy's now starting at, UVA as a sophomore. So
Is that where the old saying, don't judge an Irishman by his garb comes from?
Exactly. But, he loves telling the story that he almost cut me for my wardrobe. But I made the team as an attackman. I didn't play at all. I didn't play a second. And not because of the sweater, mostly because I didn't have any skill. And then my winter of my senior year, I decided to be a defenseman.
Out of curiosity, is there any players that you coached during your time, whether it be as a high school or college coach, that is kind of in line or parallels to like your personal journey as a player?
We have a young guy in our team here at Harvard who came to Harvard, to try to walk on as a baseball player, and was the manager of the team for 2 years, and now he's a major contributor on our team as a D-Midi. So he played D-Midi as a junior and as a pivotal defensive midfielder on our team. He was the manager on the team for 2 years, and he's a tremendous athlete from a really competitive high school outside of Boston. And talk about, I'm not going to equate myself to him because I don't think I developed I didn't have the same kind of work ethic. I had a different work ethic when I was 25 than I did at 17. I tell my guys all the time that I could never play for me, and no one would have ever recruited me. I talked a big game, or I acted a big game. I didn't do the work. I didn't do the work till I was older, till and I tell the story every once in a while that, I was as much as I love my brother Steve, and I do, and I think he's listening right now, is I got to the point where I didn't want to be in his shadow anymore. And I went about like a 15-year journey as a player to, create my own path and my own identity around that. And so I wouldn't equate Mike Calabro, who's the defensive midfielder on our team here at Harvard, to him, because I've watched that guy do the work just in the 6 months that I've been here. And not too many, I don't think there's three people like Mike Calabro in Division I lacrosse right now who never played the sport and is going to become a guy on a major contributor on an Ivy League program.
That's a really cool story, Gerry. But don't cut yourself short because you were a damn good player.
It took I wanted to be, and when I decided that I wanted to be, the work came easy. And I think that's always the challenge for even young people today, is that they're getting pulled in so many directions. I think it was much easier to be focused to be a teenager 40 years ago. The seasons didn't overlap, and the demands from the kind of the competing sports didn't kind of bleed into each other. Mm-hmm. And so it makes Mike Calabro's journey to Harvard and his contribution to our team that much more impressive.
I would love to talk a little bit about what you've helped build up at Notre Dame. I think what I find really fascinating just about, what you personally did there was you kind of built up a brand in Notre Dame lacrosse while kind of setting a standard and building a reputation for yourself just through, being authentic and like sharing your personality through social media and just like doing some things, differently. Also becoming a leader and like educating people in the sport of lacrosse, which I find pretty cool. Like I would love to talk about how you built up like the ND, Lax TV, talk about your national coaches clinic. Can you just explain like, how those things came about, why you started them, and why they were so important to the on-field success of what you guys worked on out there in South Bend?
I think part of it was, to encapsulate it was, when you're geographically removed from the core of the sport, being in northern Indiana and trying to compete against not only, the elite academic schools, but also, the programs that have had generational success, is that you have to find a way to position yourself differently. And I always felt like the challenge was we need to make Notre Dame emotionally closer because we were never going to be geographically closer. So how you do that is kind of what we're doing at Harvard right now. Is Harvard's challenge is the mystery of Harvard and a little bit of the intimidation factor of Harvard. Notre Dame's challenge was it was always an aspirational place and had tremendous. Coach Corrigan had taken the team to the Final Four and a bunch of NCAA tournaments, but to get to the next threshold required recruiting and kind of an explanation and an exposition of what Notre Dame was about. And so one of the ways that you can do that was through the kind of the growth of YouTube and the growth of Twitter and Instagram. Right at that moment, that I felt like that was a great strategy and a great way to connect with people as the game was growing, as more and more lacrosse players are coming from Texas and California and Colorado, Illinois and Michigan and Florida and Georgia, all these developing areas. We happen to be, for guys from that area, Northern Indiana isn't that remote, and not that we stopped, recruiting, Baltimore and upstate and New England and New Jersey and Baltimore and those areas, but the game was growing. So that kind of mentality of becoming emotionally closer, combined with the growth of that technology, combined with, hey, being a good lacrosse community citizen, all those things kind of interacted. And my professional career had major parts of, brand management and product management and brand building. So, some skills and professional experience combined with the new technology, combined with the need, and, being at a place like Harvard and having been at a place at Notre Dame that, people don't really know the layers of the onion. And so, we're doing the same thing at Harvard right now, is pulling back the curtain, letting people know that there's people, letting student athletes from across the country know that there's people like them here. Mm-hmm. Harvard is an unbelievably diverse, ethnically, socioeconomically, geographically, globally. So, kind of a similar strategy, and there's just so many things to share about Harvard, the beauty and history of its campus, the architecture, obviously the legendary thinkers that have come through here, while at the same time reminding people that Harvard has been playing lacrosse since 1881 and has had success. So we've kind of married all these unique things and kind of peeled back the onion and pulled back the curtain on everything that Harvard's about, while also letting high school coaches, travel coaches, obviously the prospects know that Harvard's a place for you, because let me tell you all the interesting things about it. So we're using some new technology and some new avenues to tell that story.
What's your vision for Harvard? Like, where do you see yourself going with that school?
I don't think there's a ceiling. And, I think our message out into the influencers, moms and dads, high school coaches, travel coaches, all the people who influence, the 8th, 9th, and 10th and 11th graders right now, we're telling the story of Harvard, and the potential of it is that there is no limit. Harvard has a tremendous history in athletics. They believe strongly in the integration of the excellence of the academic experience here with the ability to compete at the highest level. Harvard has 42 sports and 1,200 athletes. Harvard is one of the 2 or 3 schools with the most athletes in the country. So it's almost 1/5 of our student body. So it's an integral part of the experience for Harvard students, and obviously for our student athletes. So I don't think there is a ceiling, and it's why I came, because the challenge to figure that out and trying to consistently make Harvard a top 10 program and be in the conversation in our league. Because if we're in the conversation in our league, it means we're one of the top 10 to 15 teams in the country. So that's the potential. That's the goal.
Can you talk a little bit more about your league? Like, how are the challenges in the Ivy League maybe different than some of the challenges that you had to face when you're in the ACC?
as you know, having been a graduate of the league, Corey, is the practice rules are different. I won't bore your listeners with them, but in general, in the fall, we're going to practice probably half the time that an ACC or Big Ten school will practice, and we'll start later. We haven't started practice yet. We won't start till February 1st, and so on one hand, you look at that coming from where I was for all those years. I'm kind of itching to coach again, but at the same time, what it does create is the potential for a culture that pushes and drives itself, and that they're coming here knowing that winter break is probably not like everyone else's winter break. How they lift and how they train and how they condition. It's always important for any athlete at any level to take advantage of that time. But I think, December 28th for someone in the Big Ten or the ACC is much different than a student athlete in the Ivy League, because that day is packed with expectation, and you better use every second as well as you can, because you haven't had as many of those days in the fall, and you're going to start a little bit later. But the history of the Ivies and the rules that they put in place was to protect the student athlete and to remind him of him and her of their expectations on the student part and the community membership of the Ivy League. But it doesn't mean our guys care about lacrosse any less. I would argue that they care about it more, because it means their private time and their personal time and their off-season time is so much more valuable in the training toward becoming a good player and a good team.
A question actually just came in, and it's a good one, so I just wanted to bring it up. You mentioned a culture, a team that kind of pushes itself, where maybe it's not always driven by the coaches.
Right.
How do you kind of create that culture, and do you have experience doing that in your past jobs, like at Notre Dame?
I think in all the places I've coached and in my professional life, as you're managing people, you can manage anywhere from one person or to a staff or to a sales team or an executive group. That the values translate, and so yes, I feel like I've had experiences where we've done that. I think I don't. The game is the game. Obviously, their strategy and their schemes and things like that. But how you educate and inspire and communicate expectations, set standards. I wouldn't say enforce them, because you don't want to get into the place where you have to enforce things. You want to inspire your guys to reach and start, instead of punishing them for failure or falling short. And so a culture building starts with recruiting the right people. And I can tell you that the previous staff, Coach Wojcik and his assistants, did a really good job of recruiting not just good players, but really good people, and people who have a great appreciation for being at a place like Harvard, because very few guys on our team could get here on their own. So they all needed, that skill and tremendous credentials to even be considered to be a student athlete at Harvard. So, it starts with people, and then it starts with the clarity of, what you expect of them and what the standards are. And while you're doing that, developing a positive, future view of, hey, if we do these things, if you carry yourself this way as a student, if you act this way as a member of the Harvard community, if you train this way, if you coach each other this way, if you do the things when you're away from the coaching staff this way, you're going to be in every game with 5 minutes to go. And I told my team, the team I inherited 6 months ago, that our whole goal is to be in every game with 5 minutes to go, either up by a couple or more, or just down by a couple and within range, because that's where you learn how to come back, and that's how you learn how to close out. And so, the culture that we're putting together here, the foundation of it is an appreciation for being here, and at arguably, the most impressive academic university in the world, where if it's not the first, it's Oxford, Cambridge, and Harvard, where people want to go. If you polled people around the world, this is where they would like to be. Well, now you're here. And what are you going to do to kind of honor that, all the help of all the people who helped you get here, your parents, your instructors, your teachers, your aunts and uncles, your youth coaches? There's a lot of people, and I don't want you to do it out of obligation. I want you to do it out of appreciation. And I think that's pretty much been a pretty consistent message from myself and my staff, which is, how'd you get here, and honor that. And one of the ways you can honor that is by leaving here being a great person, by taking all the classes and with the great professors that are at Harvard, and leaving here as good of a person, as good of a player as you dreamed you could be. And if we do that, I think we're going to be in all those games with 5 minutes to go.
Another question came in as it relates to your perception of Long Island, being a Long Islander. And, obviously you've recruited some Long Island guys in the day, but just your perception of Long Island lacrosse, maybe in your experience a little bit back in the day versus today. How has that changed, and what are your thoughts on Long Island today?
Listen, it's a national game right now. I listen, I'm proud of where I'm from, but I leave my subjectivity at the door when I'm out on the road recruiting. You almost kind of have to be like Justice, you can't be blind in recruiting, but like Justice, you focus on the facts. And so I, obviously between different club teams and different events, and Long Island's always going to have tremendous, public and private school programs. So they're, guys from Long Island are always going to be in the mix. But, whether, if you look at our roster here, we have probably 15 kids from 15 states. Was at Notre Dame, was pretty consistently somewhere between 15 and 20 states represented on your roster. So, part of that is, great schools attract kids of a national scope. And so I'm proud of Long Island. I love being there. I love jumping in the water when I'm home. I love going to my favorite delis. I love sleeping on my brother's couch in Belmore. He lives right, his backyard is the Southern State Parkway. So I love being back, but I don't love it so much that it clouds my objectivity, which there's nothing much more important. I would recruit an Eskimo if he could, if he could pull the hood from the parka down and put it helmet. I really don't care. I think the composition of the teams that I was able to coach in my previous life and the way our team looks now and will look in the future, I think it'll prove out that you really don't care. You just want good people and good guys that can put you in those situations to be in every game with a few minutes to go.
One thing we were talking about in our pre-show, which we always find interesting, something we debate is, you have a player that you might see on the road, regardless of where they're from, who they play for, and you can tell there's a lot of really good factual things about that player. They check the boxes with their intangibles and their character, their athleticism is like right where you want them to be, but maybe they're just not as developed as a lacrosse player. How do you know, as a really good recruiter out there, to take a chance on someone like that? And then I guess on the flip side, like maybe a kid isn't as athletic. Maybe he does have some question marks on how hard he's going to play when he doesn't have the ball in his stick or something along those lines. But he's super skilled and he can do a lot of things from a lacrosse perspective. Like, how do you know when to jump at a guy, whether it be on the super skilled side but questionable in those other areas, or a guy that checks all the boxes in the intangibles, athleticism, but maybe not as experienced?
Listen, I wish I could tell you that I've figured out, crystal ball of how to do recruiting. And I say it all the time. I don't think I've gotten better at it over the years. I think more knowledge and more experience forces you to be even more selective and more tentative at times. I don't think there's been many times where I've been struck by lightning, where I've, watched somebody for a few minutes and had complete certainty. Probably, it happened with Matt Landis. I was able to see Matt play for about 20 minutes, and I felt like I got struck by lightning. And
Where was that? Take us through that experience.
Oh man, I was at the if you remember, the Empire State Games had went away for a year, and because of finances or things like that, so the Empire State Games in New York didn't happen one year, and then they brought it back the following year in Buffalo at Canisius College, and I went, and Tim Schur, who Mike knows, great friend, is the head coach at John Jay. His two sons were on the Hudson Valley team, and Tim had asked me to, they were committed to other schools, and he asked me to watch them and give me some notes and some feedback on them, because they were both defensemen. And then as I was leaving this conversation, he said, "Hey, we just got a guy off the alternate list. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I think he's kind of interesting." Well, that ended up being Matt, and it was the only time I ever saw him play. And he ended up becoming a great player and great person, and just starting his SEAL. He's just been inducted into the Navy. Just wants to be a SEAL. So he's one of the great stories like that. So, but in general, you take time, you develop. You're watching guys. But to the first part of your question, I don't think it was John Wooden who said you focus on what guys can do, not what they can't do, because. And then you have to figure out, of the things that they can't do, is it because they can't do it or they won't do it? And that's where the coaching comes in. But I think over the last probably 5 years, I've become much less dogmatic around things that bother me, or about the way somebody plays, or, a guy not doing something. And probably what taught me that was listening to maybe some of the younger assistants who were on the sideline who love making dogmatic statements about things. And it really kind of caught my attention and made me stop doing that. It made me realize that as you're evaluating players, you might see a guy play a couple of times over the summer. You're trying to figure out, is what they can do super valuable to you and your team? And is what they're not doing, is it a can't or a won't? And then, you're always managing compete level and things like that. So if a goalie has great stopping ability and a mediocre clearing skill or decision making, you're trying to figure out whether you can kind of manipulate that and improve that over time. If you have an attackman who's not a great dodger, but he's a great inside guy, then that's a really valuable skill, and he's a great ground ball guy. So not everybody can be everybody, and so and if you go hunting the next Rob Pennell or the next Pat Spencer or the next Matt Kavanaugh or whoever it is, you're going to be disappointed a lot, because these are generational guys. And so you're kind of focusing on what they can do, what they're not doing, what they won't do, and what they can't do. And because what they can do is what's going to get them on the field, ultimately. So, if you're a great feeder but not a great dodger, then you're trying to figure out, all right, are we going to have enough great midfield dodgers to give that attackman space to dodge and feed and things like that? So you start doing those mechanics in your brain. But recruiting is, it's not an art, it's not a science, it's as much luck as anything else. I wish I could tell you that I had a system that worked, but I do like to get into the point where I feel strongly. Like I tell my assistants, I never want to fall into I want to fall into love.
Was this the first time you got a chance to kind of build a staff around you? And if so, what was your approach in doing that and selecting guys that you felt you can build a successful team and recruit the right kids?
Yeah, I mean, at this level, yes, the first time. And I was always fortunate to have great guys to work with. Coach Corrigan at Notre Dame, but working with Brian Fisher, all the guys I worked with and partnered with at Notre Dame, so Brian Fisher and Matt Carr. Brian Fisher is now the head coach at Monmouth. Matt Carrick, who's now the head coach at Colgate. John Crawley, Kevin Dugan, who was our ops guy, who used to be the head coach at Scranton. And so, I'm forgetting guys. Neil Hutchinson came with me from Notre Dame, who's my head assistant here and my right-hand man. Will Corrigan is my godson, and I coached him and known him since he's out of the womb. So Will and Neil, both, and Ted Bergman, who came from Cleveland State, who's my volunteer, who was an first-team All-American goalie at Wesleyan, and Lars Kiel, who's our director of operations, who has coached women's lacrosse at Duke. He coached on Brown's Final Four team. He coached at a variety of places in New England. So I feel like I got a bunch of guys who are 30 years and younger, great energy. They're very curious, have that vitality that young guys have, and that hopefulness, which is so important here because we're trying to infuse our guys with confidence and belief, and young guys bring that hopefulness for sure. And so what I looked for in guys was obviously their X's and O's and their ability to understand the game, but I think more as much of anything, because I feel this way as a coach, what only matters with the depth and their ability, your players' ability to embrace what you're teaching them, their willingness to embrace it, your ability to connect with guys in a way that's both logical and intellectual and emotional, and to take what you do seriously, but not take yourself that seriously. So your guys believe that you have their best interests in heart, and that it's fun and it's competitive and it's sweaty and it's bloody and it's hunger, it's anger, it's all these emotions coming together. And I know that's what I'm about and who I am, and finding guys who brought that same mentality to the process was really important. And so their inquisitiveness and their X and O's were really important, but their ability to connect and engage with recruits and with the players that they've coached, that was as much important as anything, because if you can do that, your players want to be around you and they want to be coached by you.
We got a question that just came in from Rob Machin, whose daughter Abby is going to be heading out to Notre Dame next year. And he asks, has your recruiting philosophy criteria changed now that you're at Harvard? And what are your thoughts on a PG year?
I would say that we are recruiting essentially the same type of person. Academically, a little bit, the standardized tests are a little bit higher here, but I feel like I'm looking for the same kind of guy, and so the philosophy hasn't changed. The message has changed because I'm at a different place, and our message is about where we're going, and the momentum that we're building, and the story that we're telling, and the exposition of all that Harvard has to offer a student athlete, which is, that sounds like a simple thing, but it's a pretty powerful, palette of academic experiences and internships and the global reach of Harvard and the uniqueness of the residential life of Harvard. All these things take a little time to tell that story, and that's why we've used, social media and YouTube and different web pages that were created, because it's a fairly, not complex, but it's got a lot of layers. And so I don't think I've changed. I'm looking for the same kind of person, but I'm also looking for a person that, who wants to take the same risk and journey and investment that I've made, that they're coming to something that's not fully formed, that's never been, a consistent top 10 program at Harvard. So what I'm hoping to build, we're looking for the guys who are being recruited by all the other top programs, but there's something compelling about Harvard. And you know what? I want to be one of the first bricks in that foundation. And so the guys that have done that in our first, the 2020 class, and the guys who signed up for the 2021, they connected with that message. They had aspiration for the greatness of Harvard, but they also want to be, they could have went to other places that are more, are year in, year out, going to the NCAA tournament, Final Fours and quarterfinals, and their sweatshirt that says XYZ School Lacrosse carries a lot of weight when you're leaving the bistro or the coffee shop, or you're back in the summer, you're walking on the beach, or you're carried a lot more weight. And so I really appreciate the faith that those recruits and their parents have, and the belief in what we're going to create here, because I have the same belief.
Besides belief,
Well,
do you feel as though the players that are going to be the bricks at like the base of the foundation have to be a little bit grittier and might need to make a little bit more of a sacrifice? And even though they might have the talent and the grades and all the great things that could take them to another more established program currently, like a Notre Dame, at the same time, do you feel as though they do need to be maybe just a little bit tougher?
I just think they have a more of a sense of adventure. That foregoing something more sure and maybe even more, envied in the lacrosse world, to turn away from that takes a sense of adventure and confidence in themselves. So, whether you want to call it grit or confidence or belief, you have to have that, because there may be some tough times, during this transition. And so I have tremendous respect for those young guys and those parents who are have the faith in us. I wanted to answer the second part of the other question. The postgraduate year, I think, for coming off of an injury, I think is really important. Where you're trying to go to a better program, or you had a blemish on your academic record that you're trying to overcome, or I think this is a really important part of the postgraduate thing is you better, all these places are crazy impressive academically, and they're much different than where they likely are going to school right now. So you better be prepared for having to write and debate and analyze in a much different way than you did at probably your existing school. So I think for the right, scenario, that I think, I don't come from that background, but, I think it's a big part of, young people who are trying to aspire to go to great schools. And if that's the path that they're asking you to take, or the path that you believe you should take, if the worst case scenario is that maybe it doesn't happen, but you still get to go to a great place for a year. And two of my children went to Culver Military Academy, and that experience was transformative for two of my kids. Mm-hmm. So I'm a believer in investing in great education.
No, we only have a couple minutes left. We do have a few questions that I don't think we're going to be able to get to right away. But
hit me. We'll do it
things
fast.
We do want to finish off with. We wanted to pull up a photo here, and wanted to see if that rung a bell right there. G. Byrne.
That's it. That is the teenage George Washington. That hair actually came off. If you pulled, that was a wig. I was completely bald back then.
I think you look pretty sharp.
Thank you for that. Was probably Bob Pomponio, the assistant at the JV coach. Someone found that picture, and that's a cool baby.
I'm not really sure who sent it to me.
Not a lot of prom dates for that guy. See that forced middle part? See, that's the hairnet. That was the hairnet effect right there.
Oh, it's classic. Gerry, we really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Yeah, we wanted to finish with one thing. So we want you to strum up a question for our next guest next week. We got Joe Spleen on, head women's coach over at Stony Brook. What's one question you want to ask Coach Spalina?
Oh man, that's too funny, because I was just at an event with him coaching, and we were coaching against each other in the semifinals, and his team came back to defeat my team. And I texted him and Brian that I had just come from the ear doctor, because both of those guys were yelling at the referee for the whole game, that I had to go get some Miracle Ear because I couldn't hear anymore. So, my question is, how do you bring the energy to coaching, even at an event in January in Florida?
Love it. Great question. We'll make sure to ask that to Coach. He's coming in. Actually, he's coming right into the studio. So I'm gonna make sure the table's long enough in case he gets offended by any of the questions I asked.
No, I texted him. I texted him earlier to tell him about the Miracle Ear. He couldn't hear. So
Hopefully some good audiologists up in
I'm going to
Cambridge.
see him. We're going to scrimmage Stony Brook next on February 2nd. So I'm going to be on Strong Island. We're hitting Seaport Deli for sure on the way back.
Nice.
So I'll see Joe shortly.
You taking the ferry down?
We're busing. We are hopefully none of my players. We're going to the 9/11. We're practicing in Fairfield County, and then we're going to 9/11 museum, and then we're going to my brother's firehouse, my oldest brother's firehouse in Queens. So we're doing a little, like touching back to your earlier question, sense of appreciation for all that we have, and my father was a fireman. I showed the picture earlier. That's my father, Tom.
To your right.
To my right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
I keep this on my desk. His nickname was the Angry Lieutenant, and so my father was a fireman, and my brother Thomas was a fireman. I probably had 5 or 6 family members who were on site when the second tower fell, and so give our guys a little sense of appreciation. Harvard has a pretty big footprint in New York, so we'll probably connect with some alums as well. And then we're going to go to my brother's firehouse, because if you know firemen or policemen or EMTs, people who serve that way, there's not too many better teams than a firehouse.
Yeah.
You have funny guys you want. If a fight breaks out, you got guys who unbelievable storytellers. They know how to cook. They're just great to be around. But they have a cohesiveness and a selflessness that I want my guys to see and sense. So they're going to cook for us, and we'll be able to spend some time with some of New York's bravest, and then we're going to head out to Stony Brook for a scrimmage.
I find it fascinating just dreaming up like a group of Harvard student athletes at like a firehouse. It's just also the down to earthness of like people that serve, like firemen and officers. Like what, do you document that experience? Are you going to video it? Like how can other people kind of just see like what that experience is like?
I don't know. I think, but I also think there's a misconception about a lot of, Harvard, and a lot of the elite schools are much more diverse socioeconomically than they appear. Sure, 50 years ago, everybody had some numerals after their name, or they came from generational wealth. I can tell you our team is coming from a variety of ethnic backgrounds, financial, geography, religious, and so we have public servants on our team, dads who are state troopers and things like that. So I don't want to try to demand what our guys take from this, but I hope they get a sense of the selflessness and how connected those guys are, because their lives are on the line every time they go out together. And there's no way you can equate that. And I always get upset when guys talking about war, or we're going to, because I've never been to it, but I know it's not like sports. But there are connections between a great unit and I would imagine in combat, the interconnectedness. And I think great teams have that selflessness and that pride and support that you want to give your teammates. And so I hope that's what they take away from it, as well as a great meal and their desire to serve for us.
Awesome. What meal are they going to have? Are you eating dinner at
They
the
are
firehouse?
making. My brother texted me, and let me pull this up. So he sent me my brother Thomas, and my dad was Tom as well. They're having penny alla vodka.
Nice.
They're making us pizza from their oven with fresh dough. We're having like chicken parm and fresh bread from the Italian bakery nearby, and there'll be desserts and
Where's the firehouse, Gerry? In Manhattan?
It's in he finished in Jamaica. He was in Manhattan for most of his 20-something years, and then he finished his last couple of years in Queens.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely send us some pictures of that if you don't mind.
We will definitely do that. It's funny, you get into that, guys. When you're young, who doesn't want to be a fireman or a policeman? And so I can definitely foresee guys putting on the coats and the helmet, and they're always shocked how heavy they are.
Yeah.
I mean, those jackets are probably, 15 or 20 pounds. The helmet has a lot of weight to it because it's so protective, and our guys will be sliding down the poles and climbing on the fire trucks just like a 5-year-old would. So I'm looking forward to that.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, enjoy your experience. Good luck with the season, Coach. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to getting this out to our network. We have a pretty captive, audience locally here on the island, but our reach is, is starting to stretch beyond. So we hope they learn something too from it.
Well, thank you, and we will definitely share it with our audience as well.
Cool. Thanks, Coach Byrne, and
Awesome.
we'll see you guys next week.
Take care,
Yeah,
Joe.
LI's in the house. See you guys.